Well, hello there. This is Ina from Taproot Tarot, and about a week ago I received my Kickstarter reward from the Tarot King of Mississippi, Robby Fowler, and it is the Rosenwald Redux deck. And this is a project I've been following from the very beginning. I first started seeing posts about it both on Instagram and Facebook, and it's been a joy to follow. And I guess it's what you would call a passion project, something he's just really interested in and put a lot of care into, and just really wanted to get these decks out to people, so he's made them affordable, but also excellent quality. So I'm really pleased to tell you about the deck, but it's also an opportunity to talk a little tarot history. And I did also find out about a colorized version of the Rosenwald from an SCA reenactor named Lady Heather Hall, or Madam Heather Hall. And so I thought it would be fun to compare these two. First, let's talk a little bit about the Rosenwald. So our very earliest tarots that we're aware of, or 5 suited playing cards, were the fancy hand-painted courtly cards, such as the Visconti Sforza decks, and a little later the Ferrarese Estensi deck. Those aren't necessarily the earliest decks we have, but we really have no early mass market playing cards in the form of cards because they were made to be used up and then thrown in the fireplace. We do have a few sheets, uncut sheets, that have been discovered because often documents would be reused if they weren't used for their original purpose, and repurposed into book bindings. And so antiquarians who collect books know to deconstruct these book bindings to find cool old documents. Some of the old uncut sheets we have, for example, are the Carey sheets, which have some of the earliest Marseille-style images. And this is even older. This is the Rosenwald sheet. It has both Florentine and Balinese characteristics to it. And there's a whole lot of tarot history out there that I do not even delve into. It gets really deep and complex, so I'll give you what I know. But there are what are considered 3 Rosenwald sheets. This is the one that contains all the triumphs as well as 3 of the queens. We have Il Bagato here at the beginning. He is numbered. The first several are numbered, and I've misstated fairly recently that there was no numbering in the early tarot cards until they left Italy. In the earliest tarot cards, the courtly ones that we have, there's no numbering and no labeling, and we don't see any labeling until tarot left Italy and entered other countries such as France, and people weren't as familiar with the imagery and therefore needed labels. Now, I do talk off the top of my head from memory, so in a recent video I mentioned that there wasn't numbering until tarot left France, and that's not the case. We do have some inconsistent and fairly sketchy numbering in the early days of Italian tarot. So this has no fool. We see here Il Bagato, and we go into the Papess, Empress, Emperor, and Pope. And those are numbered as we would expect. We have love at 6 in the early Italian decks. It's not lovers or lover, it's love as a concept. And then we go into temperance at number 7. So this numbering is a little different from both TDM and from Minchiate numbering. We do have justice at 8. We have force, fortitude, or strength here, also labeled 8, but in position 9. And then we have Caro, or the chariot, at 10. Vecchio, or Father Time, who is the early iteration of the Hermit, is labeled 12, but he's in position 11. Then we have a hanged man, unnumbered. Ruota, or the wheel, is unnumbered and fairly incomplete. We have the death, unnumbered, the devil, and then we go into the celestial cards. And you'll see here that we have first world and then judgment. So what Paul Hewson mentions is that we might consider this another celestial body, such as these. So we have lightning here depicted as a celestial body, a star, a moon, a sun, and this could be considered Earth before we go into the final judgment. And if we look here, we'll see that's a bit different from the Minchiate order as well as the Balinese order, neither of which are the same as the TDM order. And again, not all of them are even labeled, and we can see that sometimes the order in which they appear on the sheets, it doesn't mean it's the order they were played in. For example, here we have a 2 or a 3, then a 2, and then a 4. So who knows what happens? Maybe some mistake was made in here and they couldn't use this as the 2 plate, and so they made it into a 3 and then redid the 2. That's speculation, but who knows? So here we have the other 2 sheets that are considered the 3 Rosenwald sheets. Now, these 2 together make up a 48 card deck, which include numbers 1 through 9, and courts, the Fantes and Fantescas, the knights and the kings with no queens. And there is another example of a deck like that, at least one, from Assisi, which is a 48 card deck with no 10s and no queens. So we also see that the coins here are different from the coin on this queen. And look at the cup on this queen. That's a different style from the cups we see here. So it is very possible. Oh, another difference. We see a similar kind of draping over the knees of the clothing, but look at the pattern and how much smaller the dots are compared to the draping on this clothing. And that's really consistent all throughout the deck, where everybody has this larger dotted pattern of clothing. So I'm pretty convinced these are actually 2 different decks, but they go really well together as an example of early playing cards and can very easily be put together to form a full Tarocchi deck with the addition of some 10s, the addition of the missing Queen of Batons, and the addition of a Fool or Motto card. There is also some argument to be made that this could be a part of a Minchiate deck. Generally, the extra triumphs in the Minchiate cards fall between the last of the earthly triumphs and the first of the celestial triumphs. But I'll post a link to a blog post that suspects that this could be part of a Minchiate deck. Now, the very earliest courtly cards, there isn't a huge distinction between Minchiate and Tarocchi, and we see some of the extra virtues included, for example. So at this very early stage, we're talking here at least early 1500s, if not late 1400s, whereas those earliest Visconti Sforza cards are from the 1400s. So we're talking about the very early stages of 5-suited playing cards where the triumphs were definitely not standardized at all, and which ones were included weren't really subcategorized into distinct patterns yet. Now, Robby Fowler also believes that these appear to have similarities to Minchiate decks, such as the inclusion of both Fantes and Fantescas and knights who are in the form of centaurs. It's pretty characteristic of Minchiate. Again, though, these are early cards, and perhaps early Italian patterns just included these types of images. And again, there's a pretty good suspicion that these 2 sheets are actually a separate 48 card 4-suited playing card deck. As far as ordering goes, that gets a little complicated. This deck arrived in Smith Waite ordering. I don't remember what this one arrived in. I've shuffled and worked with both of them, especially this one. This is super usable and shuffleable. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I've chosen to put them in this order here that we see on this Rosenwald sheet, and to tack on the extra Minchiate cards at the end with the Fool or Motto at the end of this set of triumphs. That's not historically accurate. Really, the Fool would be at the end, but the extra cards, the additional virtues, and the zodiac cards and the element cards would fall somewhere in here. Now, these decks with their Minchiate expansions are not 97 card decks like a Minchiate. They have an extra because in the Minchiate pattern, we only have 3 imperial cards, sometimes referred to as popes, even though they don't tend to have papal symbology. But here we have 4 popes, 2 of which are actually papal, the Pope and the Papess, and the Empress and Emperor. So because of the extra fourth card, these are 98 card decks rather than 97 card decks. So let's talk about these gorgeous cards. First, Robby's deck. It came wrapped up like this with a Zodiac sticker on it. The sticker was really easy to remove and place over here so it could be kept, with his initials here. And then a lovely note inside. Dear Ina, thank you for your support from the very beginning. I hope you enjoy working with this deck. I am thrilled you have one. Sincerely, Robby. And that's really been the theme of his entire campaign, was just getting this deck out into the world and into people's hands. It comes in a beautiful rose petal box that has one of each of the suits on each side and Temperance on the front. And it says the Rosenwald Redux Tarot is a 98 card Minchiate style pip tarot that is a close reimagining of the late 15th century Rosenwald Sheets. This deck respects the original's simple beauty but is created for the modern reader. And I have 44 out of 500. This comes with several extra cards for a total of 108 cards, a title card, a dedication, and a little bit of history where he briefly explains why he considers the possibility that this could be a part of a Minchiate deck. He gives brief meanings for each of the Marseille standard trumps in Marseille order. And then he gives some suggested meanings for the additional cards and a little bit of a hint for how to identify the different virtues, which, if you are not familiar with the Minchiate cards, is super helpful. He even gives some suggestions for reading 4 keywords associated with the zodiac and element cards. And then for the pip meanings, he goes with Golden Dawn attributions. One of my dogs, Ambrose, is enthusiastically chewing a bone. I've asked him to stop, so we'll see if he listens. Now, some proof decks were sent out ahead of time, and since those proofs, he has upgraded the card stock. He made a comment on Marilyn from Tarot Clarity's unboxing of this deck that he upgraded to 310 GSM black core casino grade paper. These are smaller handheld decks that are similar in size to the original Rosenwald cards. He did decide, because of the inconsistencies in numbering that I pointed out to you on the original sheets, he decided to leave off the numbers. Initially, he did have numbers in the early stages of the project, and then eventually decided to edit those out. These are all hand-drawn, close and respectful to the original sheets, but they are original artworks from Robby. This one comes in a muslin bag with a wax stamp, HH for Heather Hall, and comes beautifully presented in some art paper and another wax stamp. And she's got a bunch of cool historical playing cards on her site. Like I mentioned, she's an SCA reenactor, which is the Society for Creative Anachronism, and they get together in period costume and play period games with historically accurate decks. So I'll post a link to her site with a little explanation of what she's all about, and then there's a button on there you can tap which says something like the collection, and you can sort all of her different playing cards into region or time period or pattern. And she has both the Tarocchi based on the Rosenwald Sheets, as well as the expanded Minchiate, which is also labeled a Tarocchi, I think, with an expansion. All of her others are various four-suited playing card decks. These are handmade and hand-printed. They're just lovely. And I had been wanting a colorized Rosenwald as well. There is one available on Game Crafter, which was tempting. But then I saw Luna from Water Moon Cards made a video about various historical deck producers, and she mentioned Heather Hall, and I had never heard of her before. Her decks are very affordable. Her playing card decks, which I ordered some of as well, are like 20 bucks, and this I think was 30-ish, maybe 35. I think maybe the Tarocchi is like 25 and this is 30. Don't quote me on that. There are pictures of her fellow reenactors playing cards with her decks, and there's one on there that she shows is in great shape and has been through 100 gameplays. That being said, this is still a deck I wouldn't necessarily use a lot because it doesn't feel like it could withstand any moisture if your hands were sweaty or anything, and I wouldn't want to be too rough with it for sure. However, it does shuffle beautifully even with such a thick deck. And it is a joy to use. But this will for sure be my go-to everyday use. This shuffles amazingly and is a joy to use. As soon as I got it in my hands, I thought, wow, this cardstock is remarkable. You can tell he went for something really high quality with it. And I was wondering about that. So I was super happy to find his comment on Marilyn's video indicating the upgrade. I don't know what black core even means, but I hear people talking about it like it's a good thing. And based on these, that definitely seems to be the case. On his Instagram, Robby Fowler has hinted at the possibility of a colorized version of this as well. So I'll post links to both of these folks if you are interested in these decks. But let's go through and take a look at them. Il Bagato, seen here definitely as a street musician, juggler type character, rather than the later Italian cobbler. And Bagato being from a word that just means something small. So it's really just due to the fact that it's the number 1. Oh, and let me show you these lovely backs. They're hand-drawn. He uses pen and ink and keeps some texture to them. The papers. And you'll notice they are reversed compared to each other. The original sheet appears as Heather Hall's direction. There is another sheet in Germany at a playing card museum, which is very similar to this. It's in really rough shape, but it is in this direction. So it's kind of considered that the Rosenwald is probably reversed and that this is the correct direction, which does line up more with later decks. Although, as we see throughout tarot history, the directions get switched around. So if you were wondering why these are different. So I want to point out to you, though, these are unlabeled and unnumbered. So let's notice here that the Pépesse has a multi-tiered crown. Of course, she has a book and a key. Keys were symbols of Rome that go back to the earliest papal history. Both the Empress cards and the Emperor will be holding an imperial globe, as well as a scepter with this 3-pronged, almost a fleur-de-lis. It's not really, but something similar to their crowns. Neither one has a closed imperial crown, which we do see in later decks. But keep that in mind, because when you throw in the virtues and the zodiac cards that have human figures like Virgo, you want to remember what everybody is holding so you can identify these cards. So here is the Emperor, again with an imperial globe and a 3-pronged scepter. And we see here that the patterning in the robes have been removed from Heather's deck. And the faces are lovely in Heather's deck. I probably shouldn't, I'm not on a first name basis with these folks, with Lady Hall's deck. And Robby Fowler's are a little closer to the original. Here is a Pope. And again, we have that multi-tiered crown. So that's going to be a papal symbol. In Robby Fowler's deck, we have a key, and his hand is in a benediction gesture. And here he's holding a scroll. This again is not lovers or lover. it is love as a concept. And we see a more accurate version here, but both hand-drawn and both true to the original symbolism. Later, Minchiate decks include this lady crowning the gentleman kneeling in front of her. And interesting that Cupid or Eros is blindfolded. Temperance. So here's where we get a little out of order from what we're used to, but we're sticking with the way they appear on the Rosenwald sheets. I love the quirky faces of the original, but here Lady Hall has chosen to beautify them. Honestly, though, it's beautiful. It's very pretty, and I love it. I don't usually like prettified cards, but Lady Hall does a nice job. And this is Justice, still at number 8. The early Fortitude cards or Strength cards are shown with a pillar. But a nice little detail here where Lady Hall has added a lion. Carro or Chariot. Vecchio or Time. I think this extra pretty detail here, I don't know if it's true to the original Rosenwald sheet, but I think some of them did have fancier borders, so that might actually be consistent with the original Rosenwald sheets. And I know Robby Fowler did mention standardizing these little corner decorations a bit. He also kind of cleaned up where it was very hard to tell what was going on between the crutches and the robes and possible feet or maybe even hooves, and it looks like Lady Hall has done the same. This line work is very confusing in the original Rosenwald sheet, so they've been cleaned up here. Robby Fowler notes that for his, he sticks true to the spirit of the original cards, but created them for the modern eye. Remember, on the Rosenwald sheet, this had very little visible. So a lot of what's going on in the middle, everything except what's on the very edges, had to be redrawn. So they've done a nice job of recreating this card here, but a little bit different because we don't know what the original looked like. This super weird face of the death card I absolutely love, and it is accurate to the original death card. Lady Hall has made it a little more, she's added a little clarity, let's say. And this devil is great. He's kind of like a Muppet or a Fraggle or something like that. Now the chart I showed you labels this as Torre or Tower. That wouldn't have been the earliest name for this card. The earliest name for this card was the Arrow, and you can see why, where the lightning is a physical bolt that has been flung into this building. And you can just imagine at this time, Roman myth and legend was very much on people's minds, and they may have been imagining, you know, Jupiter here flinging one of his lightning bolts into this tower. So would I call the lightning card, you know, the physical body of Jupiter? Probably not, but I do think that it was envisioned as a celestial body in that time period. Now after the name Arrow, next it was referred to as the lightning card, and only later referred to as the tower. And most historical cards that are actually referred to as tower really just show a tower, such as the Tarocchi Siciliano. There's no destruction or lightning or anything going on. And the celestials in this deck are just lovely. They're just simple and straightforward. So here we have a star. No esoteric weirdness on top of it, or nothing to be pondered at. I like pondering about complex symbolism, and also sometimes it's nice just to have a moon. And lovely sun cards. And here we have the world before judgment, which was traditional at this time. and again may have been considered the next celestial body as the Earth itself. And later versions of this card have distinctive characteristics of the cities in which they were made. So you can identify specific landscapes, which is pretty cool. And next we have Judgment. I love, again, these quirky faces and figures here. And then we have some kind of a grotesque or other relief down here. And here, an H for Lady Hall. And these fools were not included in this original deck, so these are reimaginings, both very traditional. This one with a butterfly. Off the top of my head, I can't remember which deck or decks have a butterfly in the Fool. But his staff has a face, such as the Jester's Marat, which we find in the Vieuville and the Tarot of Paris. Although not a walking stick like this. And here we have the traditional animal, probably a cat in this case. And he almost looks like he's talking to his walking stick, which has a Marat type head on it. So both very cool interpretations of historical Fool cards. And now we have Hope. And these are, so let's talk for a second. We have the 4 cardinal virtues, which come from antiquity, at least as far back as ancient Greece, and probably earlier. And those are fortitude, temperance, and justice, as well as prudence, which we don't see in modern tarots. Fortitude is strength, by the way. And then later in the Renaissance were developed the 3 theological virtues, which include hope, faith, and charity. So this is hope. Here is prudence, the 4th cardinal virtue. Here depicted in both cases with a snake and a mirror. And 2 different types of depictions of faith. Here she also has a mirror. Although in Amparo Aguirre's Bomarzo Tarot, she represents this as a light source, which wouldn't be a historically accurate light source for this time. But it's a nice way to differentiate it from prudence, which also has a mirror. This could be a magnifying glass, maybe. You know, there are different ways to interpret it, but I will say that mirrors are just ubiquitous throughout symbolic imagery like this, so you see it all the time. So there's nothing out there that says the snake and the mirror mean prudence. Both snakes and mirrors occur in a whole lot of this kind of symbolic imagery. So very likely this is a mirror, but it's perfectly reasonable to interpret it as something else if you have a deck that includes a faith card like this. And here instead we have the faith card with a tablet. Sometimes this tablet style faith card is a man with a beard in some Minchiate decks, which I actually really love. I like a bearded faith. And here is Charity, who is the 3rd cardinal virtue. And here she's holding a torch. Here the flame is floating above her hand. The basic representation of Charity is actually a burning heart being held in the hand. And it doesn't mean what our modern interpretation of charity is, but rather putting love for the divine above love for yourself. In the early Renaissance, the virtue, there were a whole lot of other virtues other than these basic ones. The virtue that would have indicated what we now think of as charity would have been magnanimity. But again, if it's easier to interpret charity as our current definition of that, then I say go for it. Now we get into the element cards. Now the 4 elements are a concept we see from ancient Greece, from the philosopher Empedocles. Personally, I don't layer on elements onto suits. I don't consider that a helpful layer of symbolism. A lot of people do find it really helpful, and a lot of people don't. So it's definitely not necessary to layer elements onto the tarot. I do rather like having separate elemental cards, though. It was an ancient concept, which at the time was considered to actually be a scientific classification. It wasn't anything esoteric. And it was later Islamic chemists that proved that wrong but the Renaissance Europe wasn't quite as advanced as they were, so they continued to believe that the four elements were a viable classification for the physical world for quite some time. Now we know that the physical world is a whole lot more complicated than the four elements, but it was kind of picked up later by practitioners of so-called high magic and esotericists as something mystical, and remains a very helpful set of symbolism for a lot of people. So no hate at all for folks who enjoy elemental symbolism. Now, in all of these fire cards, there's always some nondescript, like what the heck is it kind of animal. This one, it looks a bit like a lamb, which is interesting. I really love this though. And it looks a bit like a dragon. And I want to tell you, I don't know if this is what the intent is here, but there is an old association with salamanders with fire. The reason behind that is because salamanders hide under logs, and during a forest fire, they're gonna run out of the forest and probably appear to be running out of the flames. And so there was an old legend that salamanders were fireproof. And there wasn't a whole lot of clarity on what a salamander is. Is it a dragon? Is it a reptile? They maybe didn't know what amphibians really were at that point. So my guess is that we're kind of going for a salamander creature here. It looks like it kind of has paws. It looks a little dragon-esque, but yeah, I'm thinking salamander as a mythological creature, maybe not biologically accurate. So I really love this representation. Usually they do look something more like a dog or a sheep or something though. And it's been a while since I've read up on why these have the symbolism they do. I'll have to do that again here sometime. With Brian Williams' book is a pretty good resource there. And here is water. This looks like a ship cat. I think cats were considered good luck on ships, but also functionally for keeping pest populations under control. And earth. Sometimes earth has a couple of animals in the foreground drinking from the water. That's a little strange that earth has water in it and also indications of air, but it also kind of makes sense. So this is the earth card. And air, which does usually have some weird nondescript animal at the bottom. This one looking like a cat maybe. And others, like the Etruria Minchiate, I think has a fox or something like that. Robby Fowler has probably wisely chosen to leave that critter out because it does cause a bit of confusion. And then this is where we start the zodiac signs. And this is Libra, which we have to keep in mind because sometimes, especially with this one, justice cards in modern decks are sometimes depicted just with these scales. So we got to remember that justice in this deck is more traditional and that these scales are Libra. Oddly enough, at about the same time as I got this deck, I received a modern TDM that has a justice card that looks a lot like that. I have several, which are more simplified representations. And this one's more traditional with some critters on it, a little hedgehog down there. Here's Virgo. She's holding a palm frond here. And we've got a couple of the traditional Balinese dots, which I think is cool. This is Scorpio. So remember that Scorpio has a little stinger on the end of his tail. And Aries. Aries is a ram or a sheep, so he's got more curved horns and he's got back legs. And Capricorn is a goat, so his horns are more straight. And I forget the name of the animal or the cosmic entity that this is based on, but it's a goat with a fishtail. So he doesn't have the back legs that Aries has. Sagittarius, again with some of the orange Balinese dots. I think that's a nice touch. Here, Robby has stuck with a centaur a little bit more like the court cards. So we have to remember that Sagittarius is the only one who is an archer. And I think all of the knights have shirts on. And this is Cancer. And this is accurate to later depictions of Cancer in the Minchiate decks. However, Robby Fowler noted that he couldn't find any historically accurate images of crabs that dated back to the late 1400s. So he instead went with a lobster. And that tracks. That's the reason that a lot of folks refer to the crustacean in the moon card as a crustacean instead of specifying whether it's a lobster or a crab, because those were kind of variable and interchangeable back in the day. So that lobster in the moon card, it's not a crab, but probably also symbolizes Cancer. Pisces. I really like the facial expressions on these ones. Aquarius. Leo. Taurus. And Gemini. Here we have a masculine set of twins and a feminine set of twins, and we see both in historical cards. These beautiful cups with the flowers are accurate to the original Rosenwald sheets. And I'll flip through these pretty quickly for you. The only ones that had to be recreated for the purpose of this deck are the tens. So these kind of follow a traditional TDM pattern with the larger cup at the top. These are Fontessas or Fontescas. I think this is the one in the original Rosenwald sheet missing the upper half of the card. Beautiful detail here, and I love how it's green and looks like foliage in Lady Hall's version. And we see the Queen of Cups here. Remember in the original Rosenwald sheet had a different style of cup, and here Robby Fowler and Lady Hall have chosen to make it match the rest of the cup suit. And we see the king with the smaller dot pattern than we saw in the triumphs. Batons. One nice thing is that all of these, you can tell what the reversals are. So the handles of the batons look different from the points. So unlike a TDM, you can easily read reversals with these cards if you like. And in this case, except for the 10, the handles are all green at the top. Some of these, or at least one of them, had less of a decoration in the originals, and Robby went ahead and added those for consistency. This is lovely. Lady Hall has added a couple of H's there. Somehow I got backed up. Oh, where's the 10? Okay, I switched these around a little bit. Sorry about that. So there's the 9, and here are the 10s. So again, these are recreations. So a couple of slightly different interpretations. We have the Fontes and the Knights. Again, very similar here to the Sagittarius card, but he's clothed and he's not an archer. And again, a little bit of signature there for Lady Hall, which is kind of cool. The Queen of Batons was not included in any of the 3 original sheets, so we have a recreation here. And Robby has chosen to stick with the larger dot pattern like the other queens because they were included in that sheet that had the triumphs. A couple different interpretations of the King of Batons here. The rabbit and dog are a Balinese symbol, so that has been one part of the speculation as to the origin of these cards. Here it's more of a feline critter. But there's a lot of other symbolism here, such as the the crests and things like that, and other designs and patterns that are not necessarily Balinese and are more Florentine. So you can really get into the weeds with this. I have not. I do this just for fun, and once we get too boring, I'm done. I check out. So here is, it says hall. Naibi is a word for cards. And soprafino just means super fine. I wouldn't classify this as a soprafino, so that's interesting. And also the coins are distinguishable as upright or reversed. So in the original sheets, the white border is on top and the black center is on top. So you can keep that in mind if you read reversals. A very interesting 10 pattern here. I think this one does have some historical precedence for this time period, but this one's really interesting and does have some later precedence, or some later examples. Fantescas of coins, Fantessa or Fantesca. Knights. And here we have a different type of coin. Lady Hall has chosen to make this coin match the others, whereas Robby Fowler has stuck with the coin from the original Rosenwald sheet. And we can compare the larger dot pattern from that original sheet that included the triumphs with the smaller dot pattern from what I think is probably a different set of cards. Interestingly, the king is the only one that has a reversed coin. So if you can't remember which way your coins are supposed to be upright, the king might confuse you because the other two follow this pattern, but not the king. And that is true to the original deck. So we're just chaotic here. This king, Lady Hall has chosen to make him consistent. The aces are all beautiful. So finally we have swords. Hall, Naibi, Tarocchi. Lovely. Oh, and for the swords, if you read reversals, you can remember the hilts are at the bottom and the ends of the scabbard, the pointy end of the scabbard, is at the top. And that is how they appear on the sheets as well. I love this Queen of Swords. Again, Robby Fowler has stayed truer to the original. And some interesting details there. Some people have really looked into where the heraldic symbols or coats of arms might be from, whereas this one has been simplified. And a lovely king. So let me show you. A little shuffling demo for this card, for this deck. Shuffles very nicely. I tend to readjust once I get to the very end though, because these cards are thick, or the deck itself is thick, being a 98 card deck. And I don't really bridge these. I have trouble bridging smaller decks, but I just flip them around. So they are a lovely papery feeling deck with kind of a little bit of a satiny feel to them. And they just sound really nice. You can see that the Lady Hall deck is thicker than the Robby Fowler deck by quite a bit. So this, again, 310 GSM, black core, casino grade linen paper. And someone who's good at bridging smaller decks can certainly bridge this. But it shuffles super nice. And for my Minchiates, I really do prefer a smaller deck like this because they're really hard to handle otherwise. So yeah, an absolutely lovely shuffle, a beautiful deck. And he's got more of these for sale. I definitely recommend following him on Instagram if you want updates. You know, maybe he'll do a colorized version of this, or whatever other projects he does. I'd definitely be interested in. I want to show you a little trick here for getting a deck like this back into its beautiful wrapping. So let me just even it out here and pull out the center and then narrow it by pushing these two together. It works best if you set them on the table. Okay, so then we've got them starting to place into the paper. Once all the ends are inside the paper, you can push everything down without damaging your lovely art paper. And then section by section, just push these all the way through. And there you have it. Alrighty, folks, check out the Tarot King of Mississippi, Robby Fowler, as well as Lady Heather Hall, for some amazing Rosenwald recreations that are accessible and affordable, and especially in the case of Robby's deck, super usable and functional. Tell me what you think. And if you have any more input on my little history tidbits, I'm always interested in what you have to share as well. We are here learning together. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.